Hey guys, and welcome back to the second part of my Tic Tac Toe in Pygame series. In the last video, I focused on the initial setup, creating a game board and setting up a list to store the game data in. In this video, I'm going to do some more work on the event handler to allow me to process mouse clicks. Using these, I'm going to determine which of the 9 cells have been clicked, and then if there's not already an existing marker in that cell, I'm going to draw a marker into it. So let's begin then on to part 2. So the first thing I want to do is add more event handlers into here. At the moment, all I've got is an event type for quitting the game. So I'm going to add one for a mouse click, and that's done more or less in the same way. If event.type is pygame.mouse button down. So what this essentially does is it detects a click of the mouse. Now I want the events to happen once we've clicked and then released, so essentially a full click cycle. So when we click down, I don't want to really do anything except for set a variable that says clicked equals true. I'll then come back down here and add my second event, and this was going to say pygame mouse button up this time. And I'm also going to add and clicked equals true. I'm going to reset clicked to false. Essentially, this is just a check to say that we have completed a full click cycle, and then once I've released the mouse click, then I'm going to add the code to handle it. So I'm going to take this clicked variable and I'll also add it into here, and clicked equals false. And on top of that, I'll go back and define it right in the beginning with my defined variables. Clicked equals false. So at the beginning, that's how I'm going to start off. There's no mouse click detected. As soon as I click, or rather as soon as I click down, it detects that I've done that. And then when I release the button, as long as I've already clicked before, then I can process the event. So the next thing I want to do is take the position at which the mouse was when we clicked. So I'm going to store that in pause variable. Pause equals pygame.mouse.get_pause. And that's just going to give me the X and Y coordinates of the mouse. And again, I'm going to define this up here in my variables. Pause equals, and I think it's an empty list. All right. So the next thing I want to do is extract the X and the Y positions from this. So I'll say cell X equals pause 0, because this is the X coordinate, and cell Y is going to be the second coordinate, which is the Y coordinate. All right, so I've got my X and Y, and now I want to correlate these back to my grid. So if you remember, my grid size is 300 by 300, and I've got 3 rows and 3 columns. So essentially, if I just divide the measured position of the mouse by 100, I should get the position of the cell. So I'm going to use floor division for this, because I don't want, if I'm in position 150, I don't want to get back 1.5. I just want to get a round number. So floor division is going to do that for me. It's going to remove the decimal point and essentially round down the way. And this is where I'm going to add my next if statement. I'll go back to markers, my markers list, and I'm going to check if markers in the position of cell X, floor divided by 100, and cell Y, floor divided by 100, if this is 0, meaning that nothing has been clicked in there yet, then I want to set this. So I'm going to copy this down. I want to set that position to the particular player. So I'm going to define that player first. My player variable is also going to go up here. So player equals 1. Player 1 is going to go first. And I'm just going to say equal to player. So what I want to do in here now is this player, or player 1, has had their turn. So I want to change turn over to the other player. Now that would be player 2 normally, but what I've chosen to do is alternate between player 1 and player -1. It just saves me a little bit of code later on. So all I'm going to do here is player equals multiplied -1. So it's just going to flip each time around rather than saying if player is 1, then make player 2, and if player is 2, make player 1. Every time I just multiply by -1, so it just flicks between 1 and -1. Okay, so now that I've typed this, I'm just going to run it to make sure there's not been any errors. Okay, seems to run fine. I'll click, and yeah, so that's fine. There doesn't seem to be any errors. So the next thing I want to move on to is drawing these markers. So I've got a way of processing the mouse clicks, and although at the bottom it's still shown the original print statement from up here, it is in reality updating these cells as we click. So it's populating them with 1s and -1s. So now I'm going to add a new function, and that function is going to be define draw markers. Alright, so again, all I want to do here is essentially iterate through each one of my cells within the markers list. And from that, I want to check if it's a 1 or if it's a -1. And depending on what it is, I'm going to draw a different player marker. So I'm going to set some variables at the beginning, and I'll explain what this means. For x in markers, so essentially just iterate through my list. So it's going to pull out each individual row, and y position is going to be defined as 0 here. So when it's pulled one of these out, it's going to be, if you remember, it's going to be a list of 3 points. It's going to be my row. So I want to iterate through that as well for y in x. And this is where I'm going to have my game logic. So if y equals 1, meaning that if in that cell the marker is belonging to player 1, then I want to draw player 1's icon. So I'm just going to use a cross and a circle. I'm going to define some extra colors, which I will add a section for up here. Define colors. So I'm going to call green equals 0, 255, and 0, and red 255, 0, 0. So that's going to be my two markers. For player 1, I'm going to use a cross, and I'm going to make it a green cross. So you could use images here. I'm just going to draw it. So I'm going to say pygame.drawLine. I'm going to input my screen that I'm going to draw onto. I'm going to give it a color of green, and then I'm going to give it a start position. So this is where my x pos and y pos variables come in. I'm going to increase them through this for loops, and essentially they're going to mark where I am within the cells. So I'm going to type in for my x position, it's going to be my x pos multiplied by 100, because initially I divided by 100 back here to obtain the cell number. So now I want to multiply it back by 100 to give me a position in pixels. So if we're in cell 0, which would be the first cell, then that's going to give me essentially an x position or an x coordinate of 0. And I'm going to end up with a cross that goes from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. I don't really want it to fill the entire cell, so I want to add a little bit of a boundary or a little bit of space around it. So I'm going to just say x position times 100 plus 15 pixels, and that's just going to bring it in a little bit. And my y position is going to be the same, y position times 100 plus 15. So this is going to be my start point for the line, and then I want an end point. So if it's going from the top left of the cell to the bottom right of the cell, then the x is going to change to x position times 100. Now it's going to be 15 from the other side, so 100 minus 15 is 85, and a y position, which is the same, times 100 plus 85. And close that first line. So that's going to draw one of my cross lines. Just copy that down and draw the second one going from bottom left to top right. So my X position would stay the same, but my Y position flips over. So I start in the bottom left, the X still goes all the way across, but it goes up the way instead. So that's going to draw my crosses. And now I want to add a second check, which is if Y equals -1, so if it's player 2, this time I'm just going to draw a circle. Pygame.draw.circle onto my screen. I'm going to give it a color of red, and I'm just going to set a center point for the circle, which will be X position times 100 plus 50, and Y position times 100 plus 50. I'm going to give this a radius of 38 pixels. And the last thing to add is that variable I had here for line width, because I want these to be a little bit thicker as well. So I'll say line width at the end of the circle and at the end of the lines. Oh, I missed it out there. Line width. Okay, and so the last thing to do now is, as the loop closes, is I want to increase for each iteration of Y. Once we've completed the iteration, I want to increase my Y position. So I want to say that we've moved along to the next coordinate, and then once we've filtered through all of the Y's and we're moving on to the next X, I want to increase my X position by 1 as well. Alright, so again, if that's set up the entire function here, I just need to make sure that I actually call it. So I'm going to draw my grid first, and then on top of that, I'm going to draw the markers. Okay, so now that that's all set up, I just need to check that it's running correctly. So I'll try clicking, and there you go. It's all working fine. So of course you can see I've actually made a line of crosses, but it hasn't registered a win. So at the moment I don't have a way of ending this game. All it's doing is it's putting down the markers and it alternates between the two throughout, but it doesn't really have any further logic within the game to say, okay, one of the players has won, we need to stop. And I'll just check one more thing. Yeah, so it's not possible to click on the same cell. So once I've clicked on here, it hands over to the second player, and if that second player tries to click on this same cell, it knows that there's something there already. So they've got to put it in a different position, and then you can't put your cross back in there. So yeah, it all seems to be working fine. And that's pretty much everything for this video now. The only thing that's left is for me to actually add in some further logic to handle some kind of game ending events. And that's all going to come in the next series or the next video. So for now, I'm going to wrap it up, and I hope that was useful, and thanks for watching.